Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Like always, we try and find you interesting people from inside and outside the world of human resources to bring you the latest on what's happening with HR data, technology, and analytics. Today we have with us Tarush Aggarwal from @5X.
Hey, David. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. And like always, we have with us Dwight Brown from Salary.com. Hey, Dwight.
Hey, David. Hey, Tarush. Good to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
Tarush, why don't you dive in by giving us a little bit of your background and what you're doing at @5X as well?
Sure. So my background, I was fortunate enough. I spent my career in data. I got to be one of the first data engineers at Salesforce.com back in 2011 when no one in the Valley really had a data team. Spent a few years over there. And most recently, I ran data for WeWork, built a 100% data team, jump-started data engineering, data platform, moved to China and ran our platform efforts. And, believe it or not, at the beginning of COVID, I found myself stuck in Bali, Indonesia, kind of taking some time away from the Valley and away from New York. Helped me, put things in perspective. And WeWork and Salesforce were amazing experiences. And, we were able to do a lot with data, but not many companies can, go build a 100% data team and kind of get started, right? And for like 95% of the world, they want to get value from data and they don't necessarily have the capabilities of, building multiple layers of the stack. Like, today we have data collection, ingestion, storage, modeling, reporting, and, A/B testing, machine learning are on top of that. And, we also care about privacy and security and GDPR and PII compliance audits.
Right.
So, what do you want to do? Do you want to go sign these contracts and build a stack, or do you want to get value from data? Right. So, think of 5X as, think of us as that large platform team, which companies like WeWork and Salesforce have. But instead of doing it for us, we can do it for like 95% of the companies.
So it's outsourced.
Yes. Like you get an end-to-end stack. We bundle together the different providers, the sort of best-in-class providers. So, our warehouse is Snowflake, which is where the industry is going. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to sign any of the enterprise contracts with all these companies. You kind of get it all on day one. You get a monthly bill. And yeah, you're sort of good to go. And just like, when you use any sort of platform, you get updates. And, as we build more and more stuff into it, you don't need to worry about maintaining a stack. You just get a maintenance window and it goes back and it comes back up and it's better than ever before.
So one fun thing that no one knows about you, Tarush.
Wow. One fun thing that no one knows about me. Yeah. I've spent a lot of my career, I've spent most of my career in data, and, part of being tagged as a data person is this idea that you're very logical and, make data-driven decisions and everything is a spreadsheet and all of that jazz. But in reality, most of my decision-making comes from intuition, which is not what most people would believe. And data is just kind of a means to sort of validate that intuition often. So I find it really, kind of on a broader topic that, intuition versus data-driven are kind of two separate sides of the stack.
So if what we're hearing is you're intuitive, you're not a geek. That's what we're hearing.
That might be a way to say it.
Okay. Well, Dwight and I are geeks, so we'll stick with the data. That's okay. It's different, sure. It's all good. It's all good.
I can wear many hats.
That's all right. You can wear a data geek hat. It's okay. I'm wearing a hat today.
I like it.
So our topic for today is using infrastructure to drive value. And while we're going to get into it with our questions, one of the interesting things is, as you were talking about at 5X, being able to have an outsourced infrastructure company does enable that. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how does HR or how can HR and the business get more out of their data by leveraging infrastructure.
Yep.
So let's go to our first question then, which is what prevents companies from developing a stack internally to be able to manage the HR data themselves?
I want to take a break real quick just to let you know about a new show we've just added to the network. Up Next at Work, hosted by Gene and Kata Keel of the Devon Group. Fantastic show. If you're looking for something that pushes the norm, pushes the boundaries, has some really spirited conversations, Google Up Next at Work, Gene and Kata Keel from the Devon Group.
Yeah. So, nothing really prevents companies from building the stack internally, right? Like, sort of Snowflake was the largest tech IPO last year. Everyone's now heard of it. The data warehouse is no longer a niche use case. It's, the core. Every company in the world should now be sort of looking at kind of having one. So there's nothing really preventing companies from doing this. It's more so, them choosing to focus more time on the analytics. And until now, they have been kind of having to do this in terms of setting up this infrastructure and do the analytics. And they kind of want to be spending more and more time on the analytics. So they can do it themselves. It's, what's happening now is they're trying to they're basically trying to refocus and kind of spend more time on actually delivering the business value.
Is there any reason why they can't leverage some of the other business analytics stack or the data stack that other parts of the organization have been building or leveraging?
I mean, in an ideal world, they would, a lot of these companies who have HR analytics teams, they probably have sister organizations inside the same company, which are the sort of larger data teams sort of focused on the entire business. Now, historically, these teams aren't able to really interact a lot because the HR analytics team very often has people-sensitive information, which you don't kind of want to share broadly across the organizations. So they're forced to, in some ways, have their own stack, which is a little bit more secure. And given that these HR analytics teams very often are a small fraction of the size of the sort of sister or brother organizations, a data team with 100 people acts very differently from a data team with 3, 4, 5 people. Mm-hmm. So, even just in terms of what stack to use and how that's maintained and how that's built and operated, they might have a few pieces in common. They might be using the same database technology. They might be using a similar ingestion layer, but the way they're really set up until now, it's pretty independent. So, unfortunately, what we see is that a lot of the HR analytics team don't really get to leverage a little bit more mature technology of their sister larger data team orgs.
Yeah, what we've been advocating and what a lot of companies have been trying to do is democratize the HR data. So it's not HR data anymore, it's more business data. And yeah. I totally agree with you that sometimes the data is too sensitive, but in many ways you can firewall the more sensitive pieces like pay or like reasons why people leave an organization. And you can then take the aggregated and anonymized data, especially for things like headcount, which are much less sensitive, and then be able to put that alongside of finance and supply chain data so that the people who need the insight while they're building the plans that they're trying to execute against or measure against those things. That's where HR data really needs to become business data and cease to be HR data.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, we now have the ability to encrypt certain columns, right? Sure. Sort of a warehouse like Snowflake kind of in the enterprise edition, it does it out of the box where, even working with PII, where you have social security and all of this stuff, where all the data is going into the warehouse, but at source, it knows what's a PII column and it gets kind of encrypted. And, you have to have sort of special roles who can unencrypt it, but otherwise, for the most part, it kind of gets aggregated up. And, I think we're probably going to start to see this trend kind of get more and more mainstream. And, this is probably a more recent thing in the last 1 year where the technology is now able to do sort of selective PII filtering and, encryption of like certain columns. So, I think we are going to see more and more of that. Historically, it's kind of lived completely separately.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
Why don't we transition to question 2, which is why doesn't a one-size-fits-all solution work for everybody? And I think what we're trying to say in this question is, do companies need to kind of build based on their own bespoke needs, right?
Yeah. Given that HR analytics is not subject to, a particular industry, it's not just, one type of company. And even in terms of sizes, right? Like, obviously anything under mid-market is probably not really a candidate for HR analytics, but, there's again a big difference in 1,000-person company and 100,000-person company and kind of how they kind of look at these HR analytics, right? And then especially for some companies who look at this a little bit as a competitive advantage, companies that, need to hire, the best people in the world and really care about retention. If you look at the tech company, people race of, making sure you have the best engineers compared to a more traditional business where, you obviously want to hire good people and retain them, but it's not, the center core of like what your business kind of focuses on. You have so many different variables over there. And, every sort of solution, every company chooses to emphasize on certain things and, not emphasize on certain things and, do some things sort of well and some things not well. And, do you want to, a lot of companies around the HR analytics space are, optimizing for ease of setup or in terms of rich feature set or integrating with kind of non-bespoke vendors. So, there's enough different levers out there that, one size fits all doesn't really kind of make sense, right? You're always going to have some sort of niche use cases where some companies are kind of very happy with a sort of standard out of the box solution, whether that's sort of Visio or some of the new sort of competitors. Some companies, are just going to always do it in-house. Like it's just too much of a competitive advantage. They can kind of use this against the competition. Some companies will go hybrid where, as you start getting into regionalization, you have some of these platforms which integrate really well with Greenhouse and Workday and all of the usual suspects which kind of come out of the box. But you start getting into the Asia region, so especially China and kind of outside there, where all of a sudden they use different HR systems there. And some of these out of the box vendors don't integrate with that. They might need to have a custom solution, right? So, sort of globalization plays a big part, size of company, what exactly they're trying to do with all of these different use cases, which is ultimately great because, one size fits all in some ways causes, some sort of monopoly, which is not great for the end customer.
Sure. I mean, you could definitely go that route. But one of the things that one size fits all does do is it might provide companies with an understanding of benchmarking, right? Where they can get an understanding about what their experience is versus what other people have and what other people do. So there are some benefits, but...
And, I think in general, right, when something gets commoditized, it becomes available to everyone. There's more information on the table, but also the marginal utility of that value starts to diminish because everyone kind of has access to it now. So it's a good, it's a good baseline to kind of get set up. And if you're not doing that, then, this is some very, very low hanging fruit to basically get there, but it's no longer a sort of competitive advantage. And, in today's world, we all are fighting for that competitive advantage of what can we do, which is kind of better than the next person.
One of the things that I've found in my past experience has been anytime we looked at some sort of one-size-fits-all vendor, oftentimes they did a lot of stuff well, kind of a mile wide and inch deep concept, though. And it, on the surface, it always looked good, but it was when we started digging down into the details that we figured out it really didn't fit the need that we had. And so I would say that really can be a barrier as well with everything. You've got to make sure that what looks good on the surface is actually going to serve what your needs are. And I saw over and over that scenario play out, and I think it's, probably what keeps us where we are in terms of commoditizing everything.
This is a weird kind of example, but it's a little bit like Facebook analytics, right? Like when you're kind of getting started, Facebook analytics, on the ad manager makes a lot of sense. Here's how much money you spend, here's how many views, clicks, conversions you kind of got, and it all looks really, really good from the outside. And all of a sudden now you get Google Analytics because you also want to use Google AdWords. And now you realize they are not comparing things apples to apples. They have their own definitions on how they want to do things in order to make their platform looks good. And once you can't compare apples to apples, you sort of realize that, hey, actually, if I really want to do this, I need the raw data. I need to get the raw data, and I need to add the insights layer on top of it.
Sure.
And it's kind of similar, right? Where, a lot of these tools optimize on how quickly can you go get started. We'll just integrate with everything, and here you have your dashboard. And that's amazing to get started. But you sort of get to this size where you have a bespoke question. And a bespoke question is very hard to model on top of a pre-built dashboard. You have to get into the modeling layers yourself to basically get more sophisticated.
And that's certainly true of definitely true of certain industries, like the investment banking, the commercial banking industry, where they're trying to solve very specific questions or answer very specific questions and solve very specific problems. And their level of sophistication around their measurement is probably higher than in other industries. And so they do have a need, and they can probably pay for those questions and the answers to those questions, I should say. There are going to be some companies, though, that are much more just at the beginning stages. And
totally
may not ever get out of those beginning stages because the kind of the balance between the risk and reward and the return on that investment isn't there. And so they may stay in the world of canned or one size fits all, and that's okay, but it doesn't get, to your point, it doesn't get you the utility that getting the bespoke answer would give to those industries.
Yeah, totally. I think majority of companies will always live in that space, right? Like how many companies end up becoming 1,000-person companies, right? Like very, very few, right? So,
sure.
Those one size fits all, there's a reason why the big players all talk about ease of use and getting set up and giving you, 80% out of the box, because that's the biggest piece of the pie.
Right. Right. And I think one of the things that prevents other companies from coming in to challenge them is that there's incredible amounts of logic and incredible amounts of, I don't want to say middleware, but configurations that you need to get to in order for people to find value in the data, that the economic realities of trying to build, whether it's the metrics or the visualizations, it's not for the faint of heart. It's very expensive to get going.
It is very expensive to get going. I think, 5 years ago, what all would be custom generated, not custom generated, would be like written down data modeling, logic. What's going to start to happen is as, decision making, which is this kind of whole area of analytics, which is, having, computer generated storytelling on looking at data sets, seeing how they're changing, and, getting really, really sophisticated around that. As, we see more inventions in just a modern data stack and more layers over there, some of that competitive advantage of 10 years of experience starts to get a little bit easier. So, you're probably seeing right now new players coming in, which are probably challenging the sort of Viziers of the world and being able to do those integrations, not in 6, 7, 8 months, but to be able to go do it in 1 or 2 months, right? Because there's just so much, I'm kind of super bullish on, this is going to become more of a level playing field. And, when that kind of happens, more and more companies will go into more niche kind of use cases. And you still might have someone who's got 50, 60% of the market, but it gets really interesting because you have all of these other niche use cases come up.
So let's talk a little more about that.
So since there's so much consolidation, since, inevitably we've got these little companies that are popping up, getting bought by the bigger companies and consolidating towards a one-size-fits-all offering. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where the one-size-fits-all is the predominant vendor?
I think, it doesn't even have to be a black and white answer, right? In reality, it'll probably be hybrid, where, you get 60, 70% of what you want out of the box with this vendor, and the remaining 20, 30% you can, have more sort of customizable. Like, even if you look at Workday, right? Like, Workday is a solution, but at the same time, Workday is highly configurable, where you can build stuff, on top of Workday and, add your own kind of logic over there. So probably as some of these platforms, some of these one size fits all solutions will, have a sort of application platform layer, just like Salesforce, has got a store which you can build your own applications on top of Salesforce and surface that out. Sort of Workday has the same thing. You are going to see that in the HR analytics space, where you're 60% of the box and go build your own 40%.
And I think that is definitely true of the HR, well, what could be called the human capital management providers like SAP, PeopleSoft, ADP, and Workday, where they built a platform of data management. And, even, and the ERPs will tell you this too, they've built this total data management platform, and they have a data model which is very clear about how the data model works on the HR side. And then they're leveraging a common infrastructure to do analytics, but then they allow for the extension or APIs to Tableau or some other tool set that enable you to take the data further.
And in some ways that works, right? And when you're big enough, you kind of have to make it work. What tends to happen, and we saw this with Salesforce too, is that, all of these, as you said, they have a very clear data model. And, you kind of have to play well with it. And even if you want to push data in, you have to, define these objects up front and play into this kind of world, which in some ways is pretty limiting, because you have to, you can't think outside the box because it's not built to think outside the box, right? Where, traditionally, if you use something like a data warehouse, you have all the flexibility in the world, and you're probably building and analyzing using sort of standard SQL in Python, whereas you get into these custom objects and these inferred languages on top of these platforms like Workday or Salesforce, where they kind of have their own languages, and you have to kind of do it over there because they're dealing with not only their own application, but now they have to think about performance of your applications on top of it, and data sharing and security and all of this. So, that route isn't really as open and flexible as you would like it. Obviously these vendors are going to tell you, we give you 60% and the remaining 40% you can build, but it's not as many rainbows and butterflies as they make it out to be.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, if you want to go beyond that 40%, you really need a stack to be able to take the data out, put it into something that enables you to ask different questions. And you're not going to be able to do that inside of these platforms. They are what they are. And taking the data out, the moment you take the data out, either you're building something around it to keep that security and to keep everything in tune, or you're going to have to be okay with it being out, which isn't exactly secure unless you make it secure. And it's not exactly going to be up to date unless you make it up to date.
Yep. And then you have to worry about data lineage and, keep track of the metadata, where it comes from.
Right.
You don't have multiple sources of truth because
No, you can't.
You take it out and edit it and it's not going to go back talk to the main source. So,
Right.
These are examples of going back to kind of the first question of why do companies sort of struggle with some of the infrastructure pieces, because they don't want to go manage all of this. This is pretty complex, right? Like getting this sort of set up correctly. And so, a lot of these companies end up going with these vendors or, just completely doing things themselves. And I think we're going to see a lot of innovation on, some of these things kind of coming together and playing well as the HR analytics space kind of gets more and more mature. And part of this is going to come with different sorts of vendors, making some of these processes a lot easier. Like, how do you work with both platforms in a hybrid solution? And, you won't need to worry about the syncing or security or lineage or some of these kind of pieces.
Tarush, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And just to summarize, we've been talking about how HR can leverage a data stack that enables them to do more than what the one-size-fits-all might be able to provide for them, and how they can ask better questions by being able to take a set of architecture and a set of application and a set of data logic and layers and not have to worry about just getting it from one vendor and actually just not having to worry about it at all. Anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap?
Yeah, I think thank you again so much for having me on the show. Excited to see companies get more and more on the, AI layers and, more and more upstream, because that's really where some of these sort of some of the comparative advantage is going to come. And I think the next few years are going to be sort of super interesting around sort of in terms of those areas.
Well, thank you very much, Tarush. Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today, Tarush. We appreciate it.
Thank you, David and Dwight. Thank you so much for your time. It was a blast being on the show.
Our pleasure. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the show. If you like it, either give us 5 stars or refer us or follow us. Thank you so much for listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.